Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is From Dorm Room to Startup, and I'm joined by Duke alum Arun Karottu. Hi, Arun.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Arun is co-founder of SmartMetals Recycling, which has done really well and has many millions of dollars in revenues and has a warehouse in Statesville. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Arun for several years since he was an undergrad. And so the point of this video is to demystify the process of going from dorm room to startup. A lot of entrepreneurship talks that I see online, they mention going from dorm room to startup, but it's more of a footnote, and they focus more on the startup and kind of time after the time period after you graduated from school. I want to intentionally focus this on the time period that you're in school so that Duke students watching this can start to understand some of the struggles that Arun went through and that the company went through, and think for themselves how they can actually think about becoming a founder. So with that, Arun, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about first year at Duke? What were some of the things that you got involved with at Duke, and anything that you were exposed to entrepreneurship-wise, and just the variety of things that you were connected to?
Well, I think like the most interesting part of my story is that like when I got to Duke for my freshman year, that was my first time outside of India. I'd never been outside India, and this is like fresh, like first time in America, like landed in New Jersey, and my family, my uncle drove me down to Durham, and boom, I was on campus at Duke, ready for a whole new adventure. Freshman year was a lot of fun, a lot of like adjusting to life in a new country, but also just making a lot of new friends. The first thing I remember is I was part of P Wild, which is a pre-orientation program. So it kind of started right before, like a couple of weeks before the actual school year started. And we did a 10-day camping trip to Pisgah National Forest, made a lot of friends there. It was great. And then once freshman year started, I wasn't involved in a whole lot really freshman year. The big highlight was definitely my spring semester when I ran into the Cube info session. It was like I remember it was in the marketplace, and a bunch of people. Alex, do you remember Alex? He was standing outside, like telling us about the Cube, and then I went and sat down and had food with them, and they were telling them like this is like the early class with like the people who started the Cube were there. You know, they were really passionate about what they were doing, and they were kind of talking to me about it. I was super excited. So I knew right away that this is what I was going to do, like throughout my time at Duke, and kind of I was involved in it starting from like midway through spring semester throughout my time at Duke.
So and that's great. And so you're talking about Alex Brown, and you're talking about some
Yeah.
of the early people like Jake Stock and Tatiana Bergeson, Ashley Chen, Josh Miller, even. So for those people that don't know the Cube, and the Cube has changed a little bit over the years, but what year was your freshman year? And just talk about the ethos of the Cube and what is the Cube?
Yeah. So I started freshman year in 2011. So I think that was year two of the Cube. So yeah, that was around when Ashley and I were in the same class. Josh came after me, and yeah, Jake, Tati, Alex were all there before me, and they were all working on different things at the time. I don't think they had started working on the current companies they're working at. So Tati ended up at Mati. Jake's got Neurospire, and Alex worked on a lot of things as well. So this was like before all of that. So I was kind of there when they were all kind of starting to work on their ideas, and I was a freshman, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. This is what I want to do. And the Cube is like the way I describe the Cube is it was a student run incubator. Like we we created our own organization. Like we lived together. We had our own like leaders within the community, and we were all like kind of, the whole idea was to keep each other accountable, to help each other out, to keep each other accountable as we were all coming up with ideas and working on ideas for startups. And that was just a really great environment to be in, especially freshman year when I think it was Kimberly Jenkins was around. Did I get the name right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So she was at INE at the time. And the first big thing I remember of the Cube is we got sponsored for a trip to Silicon Valley during our spring break. So I think it was like a 10-day trip. Like most of the trip was paid for by Duke. And we went and visited a lot of tech companies, a lot of VC firms. I remember going to the Google headquarters in Mountain View. We did a tour of the Apple headquarters. We met with, I forget his name, but someone really high up at Apple who used to oversee, I think the iPad at the time. But
Eddie Q or Jeff?
yeah, Eddie Q, yeah. Yeah, we met with Josh Felser at, what is it, Freestyle
Capital, one of
Yep.
Duke's most active early stage investors. Yep.
Yeah. So I remember going to all these places and like just being surrounded by not just people like who were like on campus, but also people who had graduated and were doing really cool things in the world of technology.
And remind me, was that trip freshman spring for you or sophomore spring?
Freshman spring. So that was like right as I joined the Cube, and it was just such a great introduction to
jumping right in, right? You know?
Yeah, it was like I had no idea what I was doing at the time, and it was just like boom, here it is, like right. Silicon Valley.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So what did you end up doing that first summer between first year and sophomore year?
First summer, what did I do first summer? So I was back home in India for most of it, but I was working on an idea essentially to replace ACEs, so the students' class schedule maintenance site. Everyone thought it wasn't great, so I was like, oh, I'm gonna replace this. And
did you already have a programming background, or were you learning programming at the time?
I started learning programming after I joined the Cube.
Okay.
So I had no programming background, and I mean, I didn't build a great product, right? It was a terrible product, but just getting something up and running was just so great. I think, do you remember Kirill Klimuk and Harris Osterman? They were kind of leading the Cube at the time, and so we would have like weekly catch up, like calls, text messages, conversations to see how the idea was going. I want to say they were working on something to do with like governmental paperwork. It was some sort of gov tech. I don't remember exactly what the idea was, and like I was working on this, so we were all like involved, and we're all keeping each other like motivated. And they would ask me what I did like every week. So like end of every week, I needed to have like an answer. And so yeah, that back then I picked up PHP, which is probably not what you should pick up as your first language, but yeah, that's how I learned how to code. Like I came up with an idea, and later on we had like a demo day my sophomore year. I don't remember exactly when it was, and then I presented. It was a terrible idea, but it was a good experience just to like build something and show it to people, and then like have them critique you, and then realize that it's terrible, and then go back to the drawing board, do it all over again. That was just a great experience for me.
That's cool. So So I think I remember that demo day. So start to talk about Shelly and how you met Shelly, and just talk about the genesis of the Smart Metals Recycling idea.
Yeah. So I I was a member of the University Scholars Program. So it's like sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So they kind of funded my Duke education, and Shelly was a part of that program as well. So we met like the very first week, like just during our USP hangout. So we've been friends since the very beginning uh, of my time at Duke. We also fortunately like lived in the same dorm, so we both lived in Bell Tower. So you know, we were hanging out. We were friends right from the beginning. Like at this time, like there was no thinking that we were gonna start something together or anything. We were just friends. And I was always involved in startups, starting from freshman year. But Shelly was like, she was pursuing other paths. You know, she probably would have like become a writer or like she's a published author. I don't know if you know that, but she's got like books, like science fiction books that she published even before she came to Duke. And yeah, so it was either that path or she would have gone like the consulting investment banking route. Um, but yeah, her father runs a very successful recycling company out of Chicago. It's called First American Metal Corporation, and they're not a so they handle everything. So they take in electronic waste, but they also get a lot of other stuff. You know, all kinds of metals, copper, aluminum, steel, all that stuff. So really, the idea of smart metals came from kind of Shelley being in that industry, but also realizing that the electronics part of that industry was kind of like the Wild West. You know, there's a lot of opportunity there. Like it's a very fragmented industry. There's not a lot of innovation. There's not a lot of big players. No one has really figured it out. And that's kind of where the idea came from. But honestly, that didn't come until like my junior year. So that's when like Shelly came up with the idea. Like I worked on many different projects like before that. Like one example that comes to mind is this is like before Squarespace was a thing. So we wanted to build like Squarespace, but for artwork. So that was like my summer of sophomore year.
Mm-hmm.
I was teamed up with James Band. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I do remember.
James Band, yeah. So he was a member of the Cube as well. So he's a Robertson. So he was doing his Robertson summer in Atlanta, and I just kind of crashed on their couch, and just
For the whole summer. You crashed on his couch for the whole summer.
Pretty much.
Working on the startup in Atlanta. Yeah.
I was in India, like visiting. Like I go home like once a year, so I was in India for like for a month. But then the rest of the time I was in Atlanta, crashing on their couch. That was an interesting experience too, because I was just like coding. Most of my time was spent coding, but also we did some work like just going out and meeting a lot of artists in the area, just kind of pitching them the idea before we had even built it. So that was a good experience. And then after that, it was like in my junior year when Shelly really came up with the idea. And
so talk about so just say what the idea is for Smart Metals Recycling, and talk about that first conversation that you remember that Shelly had with you.
Yeah. So I mean, initially the idea was very like, it's not at all what it is today, what the company is today. So Shelly's first idea was to just collect all the electronics that were being thrown out at the end of the year when students had to move out their dorm rooms. And the idea was to create an online platform where students could request a pickup. So, you know, like at the end of the at the end of the year when everyone has to move out, like people leave out their like fridges, microwaves, their computers, often so TVs. A lot of that stuff gets thrown out, and they don't really know what to do with it. So we wanted to just do the pickup for that stuff. So that was the idea. That was the very, very early stage idea. I mean, we didn't really pursue it. Like we thought about it. We tried to do some building around it, but we didn't really like execute on it. Like as we like kept thinking more and more about it, we realized, like outside of Duke, there's such a big market for us to pursue. So Shelly started by buying material for her dad. So she started building a network in North Carolina by buying material mostly from scrap yards who didn't know what to do with their electronics. So she would buy material and ship it to Chicago. So like it wasn't really like our company at the time. It was a Shelly buying for her. She was just a salesperson for her dad at the time. So she would buy material, ship it out to Chicago, and that was it. But she was kind of laying the foundation of like building the network here.
And that was for the both of you. That was like junior year, right? That was junior year that this was happening.
And that was junior year.
Yeah, that was junior year. So, talk about the transition from that to. So there's a couple big things, right? There's, ultimately you get your own warehouse, you get some investment and things like that. So talk about this transition. Like, so she's doing basically sales for her dad. How does it progress from there?
So our eventual investors, L. Gordon Iron Metal, was partly owned by Lewis Gordon, who was a Duke alum. So they were one of the people that Shelly was buying from, and Shelly just had a really, really great working relationship with them. And eventually, that's like she decided, okay, we definitely have the market here. There aren't any big players in North Carolina. And she decided she was gonna try to partner up with them.
That's good. And so let's just tease a little bit more, if that's okay with you. So L. Gordon is a family-owned company that's been around for decades, and it's based in Statesville, North Carolina. So Shelly was buying from them, and you said that she said we definitely have a market here. Just describe that a little bit more. Was it continuing to buy scrap, or was it going back and collecting these electronics? Like just talk about that fit a little bit more.
Yeah. So at that point, we kind of like given up on the idea of collecting materials from like Duke students, because we realized like there was a much better way to scale. So at that point, essentially what we're trying to do was kind of build something very similar to what our dad had, but kind of focus a lot on just on the electronic side of things. So it's like a very narrow part, it's a narrow scope of products compared to what our dad does. Even compared to what L. Gordon does, right? L. Gordon is a scrap company. They're not really specialized in electronics. They don't really know exactly what to do with it. So companies like that, like we started buying from. Like when we got investment from L. Gordon, like opened up our warehouse. At that time, the warehouse looked very similar to Shelly's dad's company in Chicago. I actually spent some time up in Chicago before we opened up the warehouse. So my junior year summer was funded by the University Scholars Program, and I was allowed to go. It was just like a summer funding thing that USB does, and I decided to go kind of experience like real operations because I knew our operations was going to be very similar to that. So I spent the whole summer out in Chicago, or the first half of my summer out in Chicago. The second half I spent kind of trying to do business development. I mean, I'm terrible at business development. I'm definitely more of a programmer than anything else. But I I reached out to all the county landfills and like town waste collection programs. So I would call, email, like all of these counties and try to figure out what they were doing with their electronic waste. As we knew there wasn't like any good source, a good place for them to drop to dispose of them off, you know. And so like I've actually been to a lot of the county landfills and like recycling facilities. And the best one I can say for sure is in Orange County, so very close to Chapel Hill. They have the best electronics recycling program out of all the landfills in county landfills in North Carolina. But the problem there was like most landfills did not do a good job in collecting electronic waste. So if we went in there and took their product, it would become a liability for us because they didn't really know what they were doing. And like a very specific issue was that they were getting a lot of CRT televisions. So those are the old big TVs that had the picture tubes in them before the LCDs became a thing. So in the recycling world, we still, at the time, we still saw a lot of CRTs. And with the county landfills, what people would do is people would rip out like the copper. There's a copper coil in the back of the picture tube. So they would rip out the copper because copper has a lot of value. And then they would like dump the picture tube, which is a liability because it has leaded glass in it. So they would dump the liability at the landfills, and then they would go away with the copper and sell the copper to a scrapyard. So even though I reached out to all the counties, we ended up not doing any business with them because for that reason. But you know, it was a learning experience. So this was during the summer of my junior year, and after that, like right as the summer was ending, was when the warehouse opened in Statesville.
Talk a little bit about how big a warehouse it is.
So it's a 100,000 square foot warehouse, 2 floors, so 60,000 square feet at the bottom, and maybe a little bit more than 60, and like 30,000 upstairs. So I think 70-30 maybe. We didn't really use the upstairs at the time, so we were using the ground floor, 70,000 square feet of a old furniture warehouse. So North Carolina had a huge furniture industry back in the day. I think it still exists out in Hickory, but it's not as big as it used to be. So this warehouse was kind of abandoned, and we got it very cheap. So we ended up buying the warehouse ourselves instead of leasing it. So, and it's really close to L. Gordon's facility in Statesville. So they helped us get started. So, you know, they would run a lot of our trucks at the beginning. You know, they helped us acquire the property. They also like provided us with some of the basic machinery we needed at the time. Like they put in a baler in our plant, and then we later ended up investing in a shredder to shred circuit boards. So all of those things, L. Gordon kind of helped us get set up.
That's cool. So, and let's talk a little bit about the basic operations and maybe the basic economics starting around that fall when you opened the warehouse. So, as I understand it, you know, the basic operations are that, you know, you're putting out collection bins or you're collecting electronic waste from companies, laptops, desktops, other things that contain metals. Yeah. And you mentioned L. Gordon, you know, had maybe some of the trucks that you were using. So you're collecting these, you're driving them all to your warehouse, and then those items are getting, deconstructed or shredded, and then you capture the metals, and then you end up selling that either through Shelly's dad's company or other ways. So just in the fall, you know, how many trucks were you running, or how many tons? I don't know what the right metric is. How many tons were you getting into your warehouse? And then talk a little bit about just some of the basic numbers there. Like, were you, you know, for a truckload of stuff, were you making $5 or $50 or $500 from the metals in those things?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try my best to describe this, but so we're a large volume business. So like most people, when I tell them about the company, they imagine, people bring in their individual laptops. That's not how it works at all. We don't accept anything unless like the load is at least 10,000 pounds. So it's purely high volume. And we work with like a lot of scrap yards who don't know what to do with their electronic waste. So we work with large companies that are, cycling out their old electronics. We work with university systems that have their IT equipment at the end of their, again, when they're cycling them out. We work with manufacturers who have stuff coming off of their manufacturing process. And we work with cell phone companies who have their returns and stuff, cell phones that are too old to be refurbished and put back into reuse. So we get a lot of these products in really large quantities. So one of our like early clients was a Walmart return center. We would get a lot of like AC units and fridges and vacuum cleaners, stuff like that. And what we were doing was we were tearing them down into different components based on what kind of metal you can recover from it. So I'll give you an example. Think about a desktop CPU. So it has the steel casing on the outside. So that's just steel. So we would tear that out, put that on a trailer, send it to Il Gordon, because steel is a low quality product, it's a low value product that we don't care much about. So it's just a byproduct essentially. So that would go to Il Gordon because steel is something they're really good at handling. And then there's a circuit board in the circuit board, memory, all those things in the CPU. So those we would, that was our biggest product in the early days. So we would take those and we would shred it. So we had a shredder we got a shredder pretty early on in our operation. And
when we're talking about shredder, it's a huge machine. I mean, it's a huge machine with a giant track and giant metal claws that can shred things, and a large magnet to suck up all of the metals, right?
That's right. So the shredder would so you would shred it, and then you had all these like separating mechanisms. So it would have like a shaker table, would have like a magnetic field to essentially separate it out into like the plastic and the steel, and like the actual valuable part was like circuit boards with like the gold and the silver and the copper and all that stuff. And that part would get sent to refineries. So those are like connections Shelly had from, working for our dad and being in the industry. So we would send all those different products to different refineries. So like the aluminum would go to a smelter in South Carolina, and the circuit boards with the gold and the silver, that portion would go to like, we've sent it to like Europe before. We've also sent we also work with a refinery in Texas. It goes all over the place. We've sent it to Japan. That's the really high value product. That was the really high value product early on.
So just to be clear for people that are watching this, so a big company, whether it's Walmart or some other company, they send you a huge, truck full of 10,000 pounds of, equipment. Maybe it's computers, maybe it's refrigerators. You take it through some process, you shred it, and then those different components, whether it's steel or aluminum or gold, those are all separated out, and then you are basically selling those to people who are paying you for that. And so the way that you're making money is that you might buy this 10,000 pound truck full of stuff for, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of dollars, and then you're selling the component parts for more than that. That's kind of the basic business in a somewhat simplistic way, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what the business is. So we took in raw material. So each trailer usually contains like 40,000 pounds. So someone might send us 40,000 pounds of material, so say a full truckload. And then we would put in the labor. So that's an added cost. We put in the labor to tear those down into different components. and then we would sell all those different components. So we take in 40,000 pounds of raw material, sell the process that raw material to create all these different finished goods, and
Right.
all these finished goods were sold to different downstream channels,
Right.
and the money was made from
Yeah.
that,
And are
that
you are
transaction.
you are you able to give some rough numbers on that? Like how much would a 40,000 pound truck, cost? Is it hundreds or thousands? And then how much would you be able to sell components for parts for? Is it 10% more, 50% more, or 100% more? Like roughly, what are the numbers?
So the problem is it varies very widely. So because we get essentially all sorts of products, right? People are just sending us anything they want to get rid of. So it's hard to predict, or it's hard to tell what a 40,000 pound truck, or what a 40,000 pound load might be worth. But like I can kind of give you a range, right? Like on the high end, we have circuit boards, but that might be worth like 60 cents a pound, right? I mean, you can do the math. But like on the low end, we might get like CRT TVs, which, like I was saying, are a liability. So there, we don't even touch that product. So if someone is selling us CRTs, we would charge them for it. So we charge them like a 20 cent per pound fee to accept it, and then we would send it to a specialized recycler um, who was specialized, like who knew how to handle that product, because that's a focus item that's got leaded glass. It needs to be handled
Yeah,
correctly. So, and
got it.
then we would pay them 10 cents a pound. So, just to offset our costs. So we weren't really making any. So we could have a truck that we didn't make any money on, but then we would have a truck that would make like hundreds of thousands on.
Right. Okay.
Um,
So very good. Um, so let's go into senior year. So senior fall, you're continuing on. The warehouse has started up and it's going. Um, do you know, like, hey, I'm going to do this company, or are you recruiting at all? And how do you make the decision to eventually graduate, and you do end up staying with the company? How do you make that decision?
so Shelly dropped out. So Shelly dropped out before the senior year started. So she dropped out essentially after her junior year. I had to stay on because I was on a F1 visa. So if I dropped out, my visa would not be valid anymore. So I kind of wanted to drop out, but I had to stay in school, and I kind of um, like I kind of worked on it part time while Shelly was working on it full time, and she was killing it. But I would go every week like to the warehouse, and what I was essentially doing at the time was trying to figure out if all of this product needs to be destroyed. We do end up like in the 40,000 pounds, we do end up getting product that doesn't necessarily need to be torn down all the way, because if you're thinking about recycling, if you're breaking everything down all the way down to like the virgin metal, then you're using a lot of energy to get to that point. Whereas, like, imagine an iPhone, right? Like an iPhone is worth like an iPhone X today is worth $1,000. But if you just broke those down into the materials that it's made out of, it might be worth like $10, right? So the drop in value is huge. So what I was trying to figure out at the time was, is there anything we could do higher up the chain? So like I would actually bring home like 200 laptops like to my dorm room and just like store them under my bed, and then try to like figure out if I can like wipe them clean. Like, so the data needs to be wiped clean, right? Because that's like when they were getting rid of these products, that's a security risk for them, and we're essentially promising that we're going to responsibly destroy all this data. So I was trying to figure out how to wipe all these laptops clean, like install a new OS on them, make sure, like run all the tests necessary to make sure they were working correctly, and then we would try to sell them. Uh, so that was the kind of thing I was working on like very early on. So I wasn't even like writing any code at the time for the company. I was just figuring out how to make these old electronics work again and trying to figure out if there was any value in it. So that was kind of my role early on. So we're essentially like, as the recycling side was going on, I was trying to kind of build a new, kind of diversify our business a little bit early on. And I mean, as far as like making the decision to join the company, it was like, so when I got to Duke, like my freshman year, that was a pretty big deal for me, right? Like this is like the greatest achievement of my life, right? Like I went to a school where like I was the only person who did the SATs, right? Like no one else in my class like went to a school abroad. So when I came to Duke, it was such a big deal that I did not care about about getting to a large company or like, I just wanted to do what I really wanted to do, and that was like a startup. So the decision to stick with SmartMetals was very easy for me. Even though like taking back, I should have been more scared about it. Like like I was just a little bit stupid at the time. Like you don't really realize how big a risk you're taking because you're young and
right.
you just want
Right.
to do something exciting. And
Right.
But that came out well. It worked out. We took our risk and it paid off.
Great. So talk a little bit about the roles that you and Shelly played. So we've been talking. We talk a lot about founder roles at INE, and have two of the key roles are the product builder and then the salesperson. So and there's more roles than that, but it seems to me like Shelly is really good with sales. She's very just very talented there. And I know that, to this day, you do a lot with thinking about the software platform that you built, which we even haven't talked about, to kind of manage the flow of all these 40,000 pound trucks that are, loads that are coming in. So just talk about the role that Shelly plays, the role that you play. And then secondly, let's start talking about the software that you start building, and when does that start happening? Does that start happening after you graduate, or just talk about that?
So when I left school, I was still doing the whole like figuring out refurbishing and reuse and stuff like that. So I was still doing that for like 3 or 4 months after I left Duke, and then I realized kind of I had this whole skill set that wasn't being used and would have been very valuable in the way our operations was working. And
because initially the operations were very manually intensive. Like it was like, let's put these items here and let's have these people deal with that. So there was not really a technology platform to manage that.
Yeah, it was completely driven by pen and paper essentially. So for every box coming into the warehouse, so imagine a truck would have like 40 to 50 boxes, like big boxes on pallets. And for every pallet that entered the warehouse, we would like write up a U-line inventory tag. So it was like a paper tag that you wrote on with your pen. So someone would like identify the product in the box, like weigh it and put this paper tag on it. And like there would be like a carbon copy in the back that would be sent to the office, and someone would fill out a spreadsheet of all the pallets that were on the truck. And this spreadsheet was uploaded to Dropbox and shared with like the salespeople. And that's how the company operated when we started. And this is obviously terrible, right? We had no traceability, right? We had
sorry to interject here. It might be terrible, but many companies end up sticking with that kind of process for years and years and decades because nobody has your skill set or kind of your position in the company to say, let's look at tech and figure out how that can happen. So your company was in a fortunate position where, you had the authority and the skill set to do it, right?
Yeah, that's right. Like I was saying earlier, like the electronics recycling industry really hasn't seen a lot of innovation yet. Like there's a lot of room for growth. And like, even though I was fresh out of college, just having that skill set with technology really helped us a lot. And just like, so like it helped us kind of set ourselves apart from the rest of the competition like early on, just because no one else was doing this. So we were very fortunate in that. But yeah, the software kind of started with just like, instead of writing a paper tag, you should just be entering this information once into a system. That was the idea, right? Or like, we're gonna just keep track of all the boxes that are coming in and all the boxes that are getting shipped out. That was all we were thinking at the time. And we put that together in a few months. So I picked up Ruby on Rails while I was at the Cube. So I was doing a lot of programming, like in like during my time at the Cube, and I was working on all those different ideas. And I picked up Ruby on Rails, and our first platform was built on Ruby on Rails. And I mean, it wasn't great either, but it kind of was better than the step, like better than what we were doing before it. So it was like a gradual improvement. And we had all our data available to us in a database. It was all like we could query the data, so it was all better. But we didn't think it was going to be a big project, right? We thought we're gonna we're just gonna have a system for inbounding products and outbounding it, and that would be it, right? That's all we thought it was going to be at the time. But as the project went along, we realized that the more data you can generate from each step of the process, like the more we have visibility over what's going on in the warehouse, and the more we can improve our process, the more we have clarity over where we're making money, where we're losing money, which process is not efficient enough. So like today, our process is really complicated, right? I think this is like I think we're getting to like the core of why the electronics recycling space really hasn't seen any big players or anyone who's really figured it out yet. It's because like a typical like product life cycle can be like, imagine a box of computer towers that comes in, right? A desktop CPUs. You tear down that CPU to create all like 5 different products. And imagine one of those products is a hard drive. And then imagine that hard drive gets tested to see if it works, and it's wiped clean. And then that hard drive is put into another box with the hard drives from all these other CPUs. And then we have a whole pallet of hard drives, and that's shipped out to someone who pays us, say, like $5 a hard drive, right? Now, how do we take the value of that one hard drive from that whole box and then apply it back to the initial desktop CPU that came through? And if we're trying to do that with paper tags and spreadsheets, it's impossible. Like essentially there's no traceability between what came in and what went out. It's all lost in the chaos of our operations. So what we've managed to do with our software is that we can keep track of everything happening in the warehouse. So like as soon as the box comes in, we know someone tags it, so we know the weight and the product. Then someone puts it in a location. So we have there's a warehouse management module where we keep track of what location in the warehouse it's stored, so we know exactly what our inventory looks like. And then when we have some sort of tear down or processing happening, and this raw material is transformed into some sort of finished good, we have direct lines drawn, like in the background, right? People on the floor have no idea any of this is going on. It's all happening in our system. All they're doing is just entering what they're doing. Like they're just typing in like when a new product is created. And then we keep track of the box as it leaves the warehouse. So throughout the whole process, everything that happened to that product or its children when it's broken down, we keep track of, so that from any one product to between any two, like any inbound product and any outbound product, we have a clear pathway of exactly what was done to it, how long it stayed in a particular place, how much money did we spend on labor just tearing it apart, and all of that data becomes available to us, and it's been a game changer for us. I mean, all of this kind of happened like over the last 3 years. It's been a huge technology project that we took on like kind of few months after I graduated, and it's still going on. We're still working on it.
And it's interesting because it was kind of organic, and it, as you said, like you realized you had the skill set and there was this problem and you were just like,
yeah,
let's see if we can solve this. And so just so we understand, right now, is your software solution, is it, I know there's a cloud-based portion of it where people can enter information. Do you have any apps or any other things, or is it what is the technology stack right now?
Yeah, so we got rid of the initial Ruby on Rails app. So today what we have it's still on the web. So it's a web application, and it's called the Elixir language. So it's a functional programming language, and we're using a framework called Phoenix. So it's very similar to Ruby on Rails, except Elixir is the programming language instead of Ruby, and Phoenix is the framework instead of Rails. So we have this Phoenix application running on Heroku, which anyone who's who's building web apps probably knows Heroku. They're owned by Salesforce. But yeah, it runs on the cloud. We have a client-facing portion where clients can log in and see like their own loads. So there's a client-facing portion, but mostly it runs within the warehouse and keeps track of all the processes in the warehouse and keeps track of all of our assets.
Could you, I'm sure you've gotten this question before, could you have just taken something off the shelf and used it, whether it's like an SAP or, I'm sure there are other warehouse management tools out there. How do you respond to questions like that?
So I think it is possible to use a solution like SAP, or Oracle has a ERP system as well. But the problem is the SAP and Oracle are, this is my experience of it. I've never actually used SAP or Oracle, but we've done some research on what kind of solutions they might offer. So the first problem is they're really built for like a car manufacturing type operation where you have, or any sort of manufacturing operation where you have like 4 or 5 sets raw materials coming in and creating one product, and then that product is getting sold. So it's got way more structure than the electronics recycling industry. So I mean, remember what I was saying about like this is the core problem in the electronics recycling industry. We have no idea what products we're going to receive on a particular day. And we might
yours is almost the reverse, right? They're taking multiple inputs and creating one output. You're taking one input and creating multiple outputs.
Well, not even like we're getting so many inputs and creating so many outputs.
Okay,
it's like many to many relationship.
Many to many,
right? Yeah, and that makes it really complicated. But I mean, SAP and Oracle, like these are very advanced ERP systems, and it would be possible to configure it to suit our needs, but it would take a lot of development effort and a lot of cost. It would be a huge cost for us to take on like SAP and like customize it to work for our environment. Right. I think if we invested in it right now, it would probably cost us $2 million.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's switch. So this is great. Now let's switch to some reflections on your time as an undergrad, and maybe also cover the Melissa and Doug Entrepreneurs Program, and maybe talk about the impact of the Cube. But so as you look back, and what sort of overall advice would you give to undergrads that are thinking like, hey, I might want to found a company while I'm here? What were some of the things that made the most impact for you, and what sort of advice would you give to them?
I mean, my biggest advice is just to take risks. Like if you're an undergrad, you really like you don't have a family, like you don't have a lot of like things to take care of. It's the right time in your life to just take risks, try something new. I mean, you might end up starting something great, or it might not work out, but like that experience is invaluable. The experience of like working on an idea and it now, like, even if it doesn't go anywhere, just having that experience is invaluable. Like just my time at the Cube before Smart Metals started was so valuable for me, because like I worked on so many different ideas and none of them really went anywhere, but each time I learned something new. And like nothing was really planned, like my coding skills like ended up becoming very useful at Smart Metals, but when Smart Metals started, we had no idea that it was going to be that way. It's just, there's no replacement for experience and trying it yourself. That's really my big advice for any undergrads. But it's also some specific things. Like, for example, I'm actually like going through like my old class schedule, and I took, I think, 3 independent studies during my time at Duke, and each was focused on a different different objective. So 2 of the most relevant ones. The first one was called the MVC architecture. That was actually when I like becoming serious about like programming and like web development, and that was really like my starting point with working on Ruby on Rails. This is, I think, my sophomore year when I took this independent study, and I picked up Ruby on Rails and had a lot of help from my professor. Her name is Tabitha Peck. I don't think she's at Duke anymore, but yeah. So that independent study was a huge, like a great way for me to learn something new that wasn't really offered to me, in a class. And obviously I ended up using Ruby on Rails for the first iteration of our software. And then I took another independent study called e-scrap recycling. So this was like a few months before Smart Metals started. So, the idea was around, we knew we were going to do something. We hadn't figured out exactly what. So I took an independent study called e-scrap recycling to learn more about the industry. So it was just like research work even before the company started. And the independent study was sponsored by a professor. His name is Dr. Jay Golden, I believe. And I think he's involved in the Nicholas School. Yeah, but he helped me do this independent study, kind of like pointed me in the right directions, and I was able to learn a lot about the e-scrap industry. And doing those things was, it was cool. And I ended up using both like what I learned in both those classes in what I did later. But like it wasn't really planned. Like I didn't really know that it was going to be useful, but just trying things out was worked out really well for me.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I just had a conversation last night with a student, and I have this conversation a lot. I have a lot of students who are sophomores or juniors who have an idea for a tech startup, but what they say about learning how to program is they're like, oh, it's too late for me. I'm a junior already. Like I can't. I can't do CS anymore. And so what would you say to students that are saying that?
I would say that outside of my independent studies, I did not learn anything directly applicable in any of my like computer science classes, even though that might seem a little bit that might not be what you expect, because I feel like the computer science degree gave me a great kind of understanding, or like it was like a very academic degree, right? It gives you a foundation for what computer science is and how things work, and that's obviously been very useful to me. But I could easily have learned all my applicable skills just by myself, or just by doing like a coding boot camp. Especially with programming, there's so many resources available to you for free. With just all you need is a laptop and the internet, and everything you need to learn what you need to learn is available to you. So it's so freely. So that's what I would say. Like just a computer science degree like it doesn't really add a whole lot of value to what I do today. It kind of does give me like a foundation for like understanding a lot of the inner workings of what I'm working with. But most of my directly applicable skills are skills that I learned on my own, like during my time at the Cube, just, you know, working on different ideas. Like my independent studies were definitely helpful because I was a very specific goal, like that I personally took on. But yeah, that's my biggest like input on that, because I just think like what you do on your own like is way more valuable than, well, you know, like especially with coding, you just have to pick it up on your own. It's not that hard.
Can you talk a little bit about trade-offs while you're in school, of starting a company while you're in school? Did you feel like you had to give up like social life or other things? Did it impact your kind of quality of life, or maybe not?
Yeah, I would say it did. You know, I was focused. I didn't really do a whole lot of other things. While like I wasn't involved in a lot of other clubs or anything, I was mostly focused on the Cube and the Melissa and Doug program. So those were like my big involvements, and I kind of put like 90% of my time into those, and didn't really have a whole lot of time for other things. Same with for after, you know, Smart Metals like ended up, you know, doing well, but it could have easily not been that way. You know, it could have easily like, you know, not gone anywhere, and it could have like, you know, it's always a risk when it comes to a startup. But my opinion is that, like, especially as a fresh college graduate, you know, that's if there's ever a time in your life to take a risk, that might be it, you know, like, um, and I think just like from what the experiences I've had at a startup, you know, it would be, if I wanted to go to a big company, I would probably, like, now I have the skill set to go do those kind of things. You know, you don't necessarily have to do it right away as you're graduating. Um, that's like the risk, I think. Like, you know, people might want to go join a Google or a Facebook fresh out of college, but um, I definitely would not have changed my path, like, even
Right.
knowing what I know today.
Right. But you mentioned the Melissa and Doug Entrepreneurs Program. Let's talk a little bit about that. So that started for you junior spring, and then went through senior fall.
Right.
And you were in the first class, and you were with Alex Brown, who was in the Cube,
Yep.
Ashley Chen, who joined the Cube with you, as you clarified, and then Josh Miller, who joined the Cube after you. So you already had a few friends, at least, that were in Melissa and Doug. And just talk about how, if there's any way that the Melissa and Doug Entrepreneurs Program helped you during that time, and then maybe helped you in the years after.
Yep. I mean, Melissa and Doug was, so Melissa and Doug kind of coincided with, like, Shelly and I kind of deciding that we were going to do this. So it was a way for me to kind of take it seriously, and like be involved in this like amazing program, while I was also like working on the guy. So I had I feel like I had a pretty well formed idea, like, compared to the other members in the program at the time. But just being surrounded by all these other people who were also working on ideas kind of gave me the extra push to keep going. You know, we were doing weekly catch ups, and we had our we had like our partner in the group who we would talk to. My partner was Becca. I think she's still working on her idea as well, right? Elo,
Becky, yeah, Becky,
Becky,
yeah.
Becky.
Yep,
Yeah, she's in. I think
yep,
she's
she
in Holland.
is. She's still
Yeah,
working it. Yep.
yeah. So just like being around that kind of people who were all like kind of doing the same thing, as you were, it kind of gives you that extra push to keep going and not give up, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it feels like, given that you already had a support structure with the cube, you did have, that additional motivation from the cube. But it sounds like it was a complementary program for you that just helped to solidify, like, okay, I'm going to do this, let's go for it.
Yeah, exactly. So it was just, it just gave me more structure as I was like in the middle of the chaos of kind of the founding of Smart Metals, just gave me a support structure and just structure in terms of my week to week development.
Yep.
And
That's good. So the last thing I want to touch on, and then we can say goodbye, is that you've been thinking a lot about design thinking as it relates to your company, and then you just did this workshop that you went to. For students who have almost no experience or exposure to design thinking, can you, in a nutshell, say, like, what is design thinking? Why does it matter to students? And like, what is something you would recommend students do as a first step?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's really two components to it. There's design thinking, and then there's the design sprint. The whole idea behind design sprint is that it kind of condenses down the philosophy of design thinking into a 5-step process where you brainstorm, you come up with ideas, you narrow down your ideas, you build a prototype, and then you test it in front of real users. And the whole idea is that you need to be sure of your product way before you build it. So you don't build your whole product and then show it to your users at the end of the development cycle. And that's when you get feedback. You get feedback before you start development of the product. That's the whole idea of a design sprint. And it's just a structured way to do that. The whole idea of design thinking is that you build your products like based on what the user actually needs. You do studies on what the user needs. You try to understand what the user needs. You kind of practice empathy and understanding what is it that you're trying to solve for the user in order to build this product. So you can kind of see how the two ideas kind of come together: the design thinking and the design sprint. So that's really the idea of the two. It's been something I've thinking about a lot because I was the only developer at Smart Metals for 2 years, and like every time I would build something and I put it out there, and then I would realize, oh, this is not what I wanted. I need to do it this way. I need to do it way better. And it's like doing it over and over and over again. So I just realized, okay, there's a whole better way of doing this. It's like you need the left brain and the right brain. You need the kind of the analytical and kind of the creative side. You need the two to come together, and that's the only way to really build a good product. So that's really where my interest in design comes. And it's still very new, it's still very new to me, and I'm trying to learn more about it. I'm trying to be more involved in it. I'm trying to practice it more. But yeah, we'll see where it goes.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, Arun. Well, that's it for me. Thanks so much for joining us. Maybe we'll do a part 2 where we talk a little bit more about the years after you graduated and whatnot. But this was fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for sending me to the boot camp, the design boot camp. That was great.
You're welcome. Bye, Arun. I'm going to stop recording now.